Right there at my son's grave, I received a message. "I'm alive. Don't believe her." I froze. My legs were shaking, and the truth I later discovered, it made my whole world come crashing down. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of vengeance from. I want to know how far it has traveled. I was sitting in silence on the front pew of St. Michael's Church, my old black dress clinging to my body, a thin, faded shawl barely covering my shoulders. How many times had I worn this same outfit, but it had never felt as heavy as it did today. My hands trembled, clutching my old rosary, its wooden beads smooth from so many years of prayer. My chest felt tight. Every breath was a sharp pain. Today was the day we said goodbye to Diego, the son I'd dedicated my whole life to loving and protecting. The tolling of the church bells resonated, each deep, sad peal seeming to tear the air. It mixed with the whispers of the prayers of the people around me, who completely filled the old wooden pews. The scent of white lilies floated in the air, combined with the aroma of burning candle wax, creating a strange fragrance that, while it comforted me, also left me breathless. I didn't dare to lift my head, keeping it bowed, staring at my old, worn-out shoes. I was afraid that if I looked up, I would see Diego's coffin again, placed right in the middle of the altar, covered in white lilies. The flowers that the Grayson family brought, Andrea's family, my daughter-in-law. Beautiful flowers, but as cold as their gaze. Andrea was there, standing right next to the coffin, her back straight and her eyes dry, without a single tear. She wore a designer black dress and a silk shawl that shone softly under the candlelight. From time to time, she would adjust the shawl with a delicate gesture, as if she were playing a part to perfection. I looked at her and felt a knot in my stomach. This was not the woman Diego had once loved so fiercely. Now she stood there like a stranger, with no trace of pain. Her parents, Mr. Ramiro and Mrs. Letizia, were busy shaking hands with every guest, offering words of condolence while their eyes darted back and forth as if they were checking to see if any important person had yet to arrive. I saw them, but I no longer had the strength to pay attention. My mind just swirled around the image of Diego, my son, who now lay motionless in that cold coffin. Rosora, my neighbor and friend of so many years, was sitting beside me and leaned in to whisper, "Alma, you need a little water." Her voice was soft, filled with concern. I just shook my head, unable to say anything. I felt my eyes burn, but I held back. I didn't want to cry in front of these people. I didn't want them to see me as weak, but the truth was, I had already cried until I was dry. Days earlier, when I got the news that Diego had fallen from scaffolding at the construction site. An accident? That's what they said. But my heart, a mother's heart, didn't believe it. Something didn't add up. I could feel it, but I didn't know what it was. The priest began to speak. His farewell words resonated, mixing with the melancholic sound of the organ. I heard without listening. Each sound was like a knife plunging into my heart. Diego's old friends, the architects who worked with my son, came one by one. They left wreaths of white flowers. They bowed their heads with reddened eyes. I looked at them. Those young men who once sat in my small kitchen, laughing and joking with Diego, and my heart tightened again. My son, my smart, kind son, was now nothing more than a memory. When the procession began to move to take the coffin to the cemetery, the sky suddenly darkened. The wind blew hard, a biting wind that dislodged my mourning veil. I tried to fix it, but my hands were trembling so much that I couldn't. I walked close to the group, my feet as heavy as if the earth were pulling me down. Every step was a struggle not to fall apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull Diego out of that coffin. I wanted to hug my son one more time, but I could only walk in silence, enduring the pain in silence. Upon arriving at the cemetery, the sound of the first shovel of earth on the coffin was dry. That sound was like a hammer blow to my heart. I crossed myself. Tears welled up, blurring my vision. I could no longer see clearly, only the blurred image of the coffin slowly being covered by the red earth. Diego, my son, whom I raised, who hugged me every Christmas, was now gone forever. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt tight. No sound could escape. Suddenly, the phone in my skirt pocket vibrated, a small beep. But in the silence of the cemetery, it sounded like thunder. I was startled, thinking someone had the wrong number. With trembling hands, I took out the phone. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. I read it, and the world seemed to stop. "Mom, it's me. I'm alive. Don't believe her." I froze. My heart was pounding, as if it wanted to escape my chest. I squeezed the phone so hard that my nails dug into the palm of my hand. I looked at the grave where Diego's face was now just a blurred shadow under the earth. My son. How was it possible? Diego was gone. I myself saw the coffin being lowered. So where did this message come from? Who sent it? And why? Right at this moment, when I was standing in front of my son's grave, I stood paralyzed, my gaze fixed on the grave, unable to move, unable to speak. There was a storm in my head, questions swirling with no answers. Rosora gently shook my arm. Her voice was concerned. "Alma, are you all right?" I nodded without thinking, quickly putting the phone back in my pocket as if I was afraid someone would see it. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want anyone to ask. That message, whether real or a cruel joke, was my secret, for now. The guests began to leave, leaving me alone with the wreaths of white flowers and the smell of wet earth. Andrea approached. The clicking of her heels echoed on the stone ground. "Take care, Mom, please," she said, in a voice as cold as ice. Her hand touched my shoulder, but it was a fleeting brush, as if she didn't want to touch me for long. I followed her with my gaze and saw Mr. Ramiro, who gave me a cold, sharp look before turning to tell his youngest daughter to pick up the remaining wreaths. They were in a hurry, as if they wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, feeling the loneliness envelop me, like a heavy blanket. The sky began to release a drizzle. The drops fell, mixing with the fresh earth on Diego's grave. I followed the people leaving with their shoes full of mud and their shawls soaked. It was raining, but I didn't feel cold. My tears also mixed with the rain, falling in silence, as if they were part of that same drizzle. I returned to the empty house. I pushed the old wooden door, and a dry creak echoed like a sad greeting. A gust of humid, musty air hit me in the face. The smell of old times, of the years I once thought would last forever. My shoes squelched, leaving faint footprints on the worn wooden floor. I took off my rain-soaked coat and hung it on the dilapidated coat rack on the wall where Diego used to hang his little hat when he was a boy. I stood there, looking around, feeling as if the house also sighed with me. Silent, cold, as if it also knew its owner had lost an important piece. The long dining room table was covered by a thin layer of dust. The wooden chairs were messy, with no one to occupy them for a long time. I remembered the nights when the whole family would gather, the clinking of plates, Diego's laughter telling stories from school. Now there was only an overwhelming silence that threatened to swallow me. I went to turn on the old table lamp. Its weak yellow light projected onto the wall, illuminating the family photo hanging crooked. In the photo, I was young, with my hair still black, smiling with my two sons. Diego, with a radiant smile, his eyes sparkling, as if they wanted to embrace the whole world. Elvio, smaller, curled up next to his brother, with a shy but warm smile. Looking at them made my heart ache. I would never see those smiles again. I slumped into the old armchair. The worn, ripped fabric brushed my hand, but I didn't care. I closed my eyes, and like a waterfall, the memories returned, dragging me back to those days I once thought were endless. I saw the small kitchen, the reddish fire crackling, the pot of broth bubbling, the aroma of corn and beans filling the air. Diego and Elvio ran through the living room, their laughter echoing, playing freeze tag with some old rags I had sewn for them. "Mom, Diego is cheating!" Elvio would shout, his face flushed, while Diego would just laugh heartily and run to hug his brother. I watched them from the kitchen door, my heart as warm as the fire in the stove. I remember as if it were yesterday the first time I saw Elvio. That day I went to St. Michael's Church to pray as I did every Sunday. In a back corner, a scrawny boy in torn clothes, hugging an old tattered Bible, was huddled. His eyes were empty. But when he looked at me, I saw a small spark, as if he were begging to be saved. I didn't think much about it. I simply knelt beside him and put my hand on his shoulder. "Do you want to come with me?" I asked in a soft voice. The boy nodded without saying anything, but his small hand clung to mine. When I brought Elvio home, Diego, who was 10 at the time, ran to the door, looking with curiosity at the unknown boy. "This is your brother, Diego," I said. Diego tilted his head and suddenly took Elvio's hand, smiling from ear to ear. "I'm going to share my toys with you. Do you want to?" At that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. Elvio wasn't just an orphan boy. He had become part of my family. They both grew up together like two intertwined branches of a tree. The backyard was always full of laughter, of their fights to see who could climb the tree higher or who was better at playing soccer. On Christmas nights, the three of us would sit around the small pine tree decorated with paper stars that I cut out myself. Diego always argued to make the biggest star to put it on top, while Elvio carefully hung each piece of paper, afraid it would fall. "Mom, this year we're making tamales, right?" Diego would ask with bright eyes. I would nod, even though I knew I'd have to stay up late to knead the dough and wrap them. But seeing my two sons smile, I was willing to do anything. Then time passed cruelly fast. Elvio grew up, smart and hardworking, and got a scholarship to study at a university in the United States. The night he left, I stayed in the backyard watching Elvio hug Diego tightly. Diego was crying, although he tried to hide it. "Go, study hard, and when you make it big, don't forget to come back to Mom and me," Diego said, his voice choked, but trying to sound strong. I just stood there, hugging them both, feeling proud and sad at the same time. When Elvio left, the house suddenly felt empty. Only Diego and I were left, leaning on each other. Diego grew up and became a talented architect. He moved to Cleveland to work on big constructions. I still remember the times he would call home telling me about his plans, the buildings he was designing. "Mom, I want to build you a beautiful house with a garden of white chrysanthemums," he once told me, his voice full of enthusiasm. I just smiled and told him, "All I need is for you to be well." But then Diego met Andrea, the young woman from the Grayson family, a rich and powerful family. The first time he brought her home, I did everything I could to receive them well. I made Diego's favorite pot roast. I set the table impeccably, but Andrea just frowned at the old shingle roof and said in a cold voice, "Your house is so small." I forced a smile, but I felt a pang in my heart. Diego just stood there, not saying anything, just bowing his head as if he were ashamed of his mother's humble home. From then on, the distance between Diego and me grew bigger and bigger. He came home less on weekends. He was busy with big projects in the city. Every time he came, Andrea always accompanied him, and I saw how my son changed. He became distant. He spoke little. His eyes no longer sparkled as they used to. The calls from Mr. Ramiro and Mrs. Letizia, Andrea's parents, made things worse. They involved Diego in investment projects, in plans that I didn't understand at all. Once I accidentally overheard a call from Mrs. Letizia. Her voice was sharp. What would that small-town widow know about getting involved? I stood there, clutching the phone receiver, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to put Diego in a difficult situation. I just wanted my son to be happy. Early in the morning, the neighbor's rooster crowing broke the mist that still covered the small street. I opened my eyes, but I felt as if I hadn't slept at all night. I had deep, dark circles. My eyelids were heavy, as if someone had put stones on them. My body ached. Every step was slow, as if I were dragging a lifetime of suffering. I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at my face, the wrinkles more pronounced, my eyes clouded with tears and insomnia. I wondered, Since when had the strong woman who had raised 2 sons alone become so fragile? But then I shook my head, telling myself I had to get up for Diego. I couldn't allow myself to fall. I opened the door and went out to the yard. The sky was still misty. The fresh air hit my face, bringing the smell of wet earth from last night's rain. Rosora, my lifelong neighbor, was sweeping her yard on the other side of the street. When she saw me, she stopped, leaning on her broom, and called out, "Alma, did you get any sleep? You look very tired." Her voice was full of concern, like a true sister. I just nodded, trying to force a pale smile, but I felt a lump in my throat and couldn't say anything. I wanted to tell her about yesterday's strange message, about the doubts that were gnawing at me inside, but I was afraid that if I said it, everything would become even more complicated, or worse, that I would discover something I wasn't prepared for. Just then, the phone in my sweater pocket vibrated, a small beep, but it made my heart skip a beat. I took it out with a trembling hand and turned the screen on again. The unknown number. The message appeared short but chilling. "Don't eat or drink anything they give you. They want you to be silent forever." I stood paralyzed in front of the gate, as if my feet were nailed to the ground. My hand trembled uncontrollably, reading each word over and over, as if reading them enough times would bring an explanation. But the more I read, the more confused I felt. Who were they? Why did they want me to be silent forever? And the person sending these messages? What did they know about Diego? About my son's death? I was still there, clutching the phone in my hand, when a shiny black car stopped in front of the gate. The door opened and Andrea got out, followed by her mother, Mrs. Letizia. They were impeccably dressed, as if they had just come from an elegant party. Andrea was carrying a basket with sweetbread, and Mrs. Letizia a coffee pot whose aroma spread through the air. Andrea smiled, but her smile was so fake that it sent a shiver down my spine. "Mom, we brought you a sweet roll so you can eat and feel better," she said in a voice that was sweet but cold. Mrs. Letizia intervened with her sharp voice. "That's right, Alma. A woman your age needs something sweet, not to be sad. Think of it as a little something from us." I looked at them, feeling as if a snake was twisting in my stomach. The message from a moment ago still resonated in my head. Don't eat or drink anything they give you. I invited them in, even though I didn't want to. In the living room, the old wooden furniture made Andrea wrinkle her nose, while Mrs. Letizia looked around the room as if she were evaluating every corner. They put the basket of bread on the table and opened it. The sweet, buttery smell spread, but to me, it smelled of falseness. Andrea took a piece of bread and brought it closer to my hand. Her voice was still sweet as honey. "Try it, Mom. It's delicious. I chose the one you like." I looked at the bread in her hand. My heart was pounding. The message was a warning, and I didn't dare to touch it. I forced a smile and said, "Thank you, honey. Just leave it there. I'll eat it later." Then I pretended to get up to go to the kitchen for water, just to avoid their gazes. When I came back, I saw that Rosora had crossed the street and was standing at the door, looking in with curiosity. Discreetly, I pushed the tray of bread towards her and said, "Rosora, try the Grayson's bread. It's very good." Andrea frowned for a moment, but quickly regained her friendliness and said, smiling, "Yes, Mrs. Rosora, try it." I looked at her, trying to hide the shiver that ran down my back. Was I imagining things, or was that message real? And were the people in front of me hiding something? To break the tense atmosphere, I asked in a low voice, "Yesterday at the funeral, I didn't see your mother's family. They were very close to him." Andrea replied immediately with a sharp voice, "They were busy." A flash of annoyance crossed her eyes, as if I had touched on a wound I shouldn't have. Mrs. Letizia intervened with a voice that was soft but sharp. "Everyone has their own things to deal with, Alma. The funeral is over. Don't worry about it." I nodded, but inside, suspicions were growing like an approaching black cloud. When they got up to leave, Mrs. Letizia suddenly squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. She leaned in and whispered, "A widow should keep her mouth shut and not meddle in what doesn't concern her." Her words were like a stab, cold and threatening. I just stood there without responding, just watching their silhouettes disappear behind the gate. The door closed, and the room returned to silence. Only the smell of sweet bread remained, like a reminder of the charade that had just happened. I sat down in the armchair with my hand on my chest, feeling a storm forming inside me. In the afternoon, the sky was cloudy, as if the whole world was sad with me. The cold wind slipped through the cracks in the window, bringing a dampness that made my skin crawl. I stood in the living room looking at the empty house, feeling that its silence was swallowing me. I couldn't stay here, letting doubt and pain consume me. I decided to go up to the workbench where Diego used to work whenever he came to visit. Maybe there I would find something of my son, a piece of memory to hold on to, or just feel that he was still close. The workbench was small, dusty, like a forgotten world. Diego's plans were scattered on the table. Some pencils were rolling around, an old coffee cup with a dry stain on the bottom. I touched the cup, my fingers brushing the chipped porcelain rim, and I suddenly remembered the nights when Diego sat here, drawing late, with sparkling eyes, while he told me about the buildings he dreamed of building. "Mom, I'm going to make you a beautiful house so you won't have to worry about anything anymore," he would say with a voice full of passion. I smiled sadly, tears burned in my eyes. Now all that was left were unfinished sketches. I took a cloth to wipe the dust and began to organize the papers. Each sheet was like a fragment of memory. Every stroke of Diego's seemed to whisper to me. Then, as I lifted a bundle of plans, a paper folded in a hurry fell, sliding onto the wooden floor. I knelt to pick it up, my hand trembling slightly. The paper was thin, wrinkled, as if it had been folded in a hurry. I opened it, and instantly I felt my heart stop. The handwriting was clumsy, shaky, nothing like Diego's careful writing. "Mom, if something happens to me, look for Elvio. They don't just want to kill me, they're coming for you too." I froze. The letter fell from my hands, fluttering to the floor. My whole world spun. My mind went blank. Only those words resonated. They don't just want to kill me. Who were they, and why were they coming for me? I quickly picked up the letter, pressing it against my chest as if I was afraid it would disappear. My heart was pounding wildly. Every beat threatened to break my chest. Diego, my son, knew something. He feared something and had left me this message. But why didn't he tell me directly? Why hide it among these papers? Just then, the barking of a dog resonated from the yard below. So loud it made me jump. I ran to the window with my heart in my throat and looked outside. It was just the kids from the street playing soccer. Their laughter mixed with the barking. I let out my breath, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling of unease. I went back. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my sweater pocket, as if I were hiding a secret that was too heavy. I didn't want anyone to see it. I didn't want anyone to know, at least not for now. This letter, the words Diego wrote, was the last thread that connected me to my son, and I had to protect it. Suddenly it started to rain. The drops hit the shingle roof, accompanied by the rumble of distant thunder. I went to the window, watching the rain fall in buckets, blurring the small street. The rain seemed to speak for my heart, full of anger and pain. I stood there, my hand squeezing the letter in my pocket, feeling as if a real storm was about to break out in my life. Night fell, and the rain was relentless. Each drop hit the old shingle roof with force, creating heavy sounds like that of my heart breaking. The roof was leaking, and water fell with a cold sound into a metal bucket placed in the middle of the living room, a monotonous, sad sound, as if it were counting every second that passed in my pain. I sat in the old armchair with Diego's letter clutched in my hand, his clumsy words etched in my heart. "They don't just want to kill me, they're coming for you too." That phrase resonated, preventing me from stopping thinking about who they were and why my son had to write such desperate words. I hugged the letter to my chest, feeling as if I were hugging Diego himself, but the pain only grew deeper. The doubts inside me grew like a slow fire, burning and terrifying. Outside, the thunder rumbled, making the window frame vibrate. I started, looking at the curtain of rain with a restless heart. Everything seemed to be against me. The rain, the wind, and the secrets I couldn't yet reach. Suddenly, some insistent knocks sounded at the door. Knock, knock, knock. The sound tore through the silence, making my heart race. Who could it be at this hour, in the middle of this downpour? Frightened, I took the bamboo stick that was in a corner with a trembling hand. The knocks became more urgent, mixing with the fierce barking of the street dogs. I walked slowly towards the door. Each step was heavy, as if I were walking through mud. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, a stranger or the truth I was trying to find. Trembling, I opened the door. The faint light from the yard lamp shone in front of me. There stood Elvio, soaked in an old coat, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes reddened as if he had just been crying. I froze. The stick fell from my hands and hit the floor with a clatter. "Elvio," I whispered, my voice choked, unable to believe what I was seeing. Without thinking any more, I ran and hugged him. The water from his clothes soaked me, cold, but I didn't care. I hugged Elvio tightly, as if I were hugging a part of the past. A part of Diego. We both burst into tears, our tears mixing with the rain. "Mom," Elvio's voice was a trembling murmur. "I'm back." I brought him inside. I quickly grabbed a dry towel from behind the door and dried his hair and shoulders. My hands were still shaking, not from the cold, but from a mix of joy and pain. Elvio, the adopted son I had loved as if he were my own. Now he was in front of me. After so many years of absence, I put a hot teapot on the table. The aroma of herbal tea spread, but it couldn't calm the storm inside me. We sat across from each other. The yellowish light of the lamp illuminated Elvio's face. He was now mature, but his eyes still held the sweetness of the boy from before. I wanted to ask him so many things, to know why he had returned just now, but I stayed silent, waiting for him to speak. Elvio took a deep breath, looked me straight in the eyes and said in a grave voice, "Mom, I was the one who sent the messages. It wasn't Diego." His words were like a stab that left me breathless. I stared at him, unable to say a word. Those messages, those lines that had filled me with hope and panic were from Elvio. I wanted to ask, to scream, but my throat felt closed. Elvio took out his phone, turned on the screen, and showed me a series of messages between him and Diego. Short words, but full of anguish. Then he played a video saying in a low voice, "Watch this." Diego sent it to me before the screen lit up, and Diego's face appeared, haggard, his eyes full of concern. He was sitting in his familiar study. The dim light illuminated his tired face. Diego's voice was hoarse, as if he were trying to contain fear. "Elvio, they are forcing me to sign a life insurance policy, to write a will. Now they also want to force Mom to sign. If something happens to me, come back and protect Mom." I covered my face. Tears streamed down, falling silently. Diego, my son, knew he was in danger. He tried to protect me even at the edge of death. I looked at the screen, at my son's face, and felt my heart break into 1,000 pieces. Elvio took my hand firmly. His hand was warm, but his voice was firm. "Diego trusted me, and I'm not going to leave you alone. I promised him." I looked up, looked into Elvio's eyes, and saw a determination I had never seen before. He was no longer the scrawny boy I had picked up from the church. Now he was a man with love and responsibility for his family, even though we didn't share the same blood. I nodded. Tears continued to fall, but inside me, a small spark of hope began to ignite. Elvio had returned, and I was no longer alone. Outside, the rain continued to fall in buckets, as if trying to wash away the sins someone was trying to hide. That night, my small house was plunged into darkness. Only the weak light of the old table lamp reflected on the wall. The rain continued to fall in buckets. The patter on the shingle roof seemed to keep time with my pain. I sat across from Elvio at the old wooden table where Diego used to eat his simple meals with me. Elvio put his laptop on the table. His gaze was serious, as if he were preparing to show me something that would change everything. "Mom, you need to see this," he said, in a low but firm voice. I nodded, even though my heart was pounding, as if it knew that what I was about to see would break my heart once more. Elvio pressed play, and the laptop screen lit up. Diego's face appeared haggard, with sunken eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. He was sitting in his study. The dim light of a desk lamp illuminated his face, which was full of anguish. "Mom." Diego's voice was hoarse, choked, as if it cost him great effort to speak. "Andrea didn't marry me for love. She just wanted my money. Her parents threatened me with you if I didn't give them money. They said you would have an accident. I had to take out all my savings, but it wasn't enough." I felt my blood run cold. Every word from Diego was like a stab directly to my heart. Andrea, the daughter-in-law I had tried to love, the one I hoped would make Diego happy, turned out to be an imposter. And her parents, Mr. Ramiro and Mrs. Leticia, who had always looked at me with contempt, dared to use me to threaten my own son. Elvio paused the video and looked at me with eyes full of pain. "He sent it to me right before he died," he said in a grave voice. "Diego knew I was the only one he could trust." I trembled. My hands clung to the edge of the table. My nails dug into the old wood. "So they set a trap for him from the beginning," I whispered, my voice choked, as if saying it out loud would make the truth more real. Elvio nodded without saying anything, but his gaze was firm, as if he wanted to give me strength. He played another video. Diego appeared again, even more exhausted. His voice trembled, but every word was determined. "When I ran out of money, they forced me to sign a life insurance policy with Andrea as the sole beneficiary. Then they made me sign a will, leaving everything to her." He paused, took a deep breath, as if he were containing his rage. "They also wanted me to convince you to sign a policy where I would be the beneficiary, because if I died before you, that money would go to Andrea." I squeezed the edge of the table so hard that the wood creaked. I felt like my heart was going to burst. It turned out that everything was a plan, a trap, set long ago. Diego, my son, had been cornered, forced, threatened, and his mother had no idea. In the video, Diego looked directly at the camera. His eyes were full of desperation, but also of determination. "I'm going to refuse," he said, emphasizing each word. "If they dare to touch my mom, I'm going to tell the police everything." The video ended. The screen went black. Only the sound of the rain outside could be heard. I covered my face. Tears streamed down my wrinkled hands. I cried without making a sound, just with choked sobs. Diego, my son, fought until the end, not for himself, but for me. He tried to protect me, even knowing he could lose everything, but he lost. And now it was I who had to continue that fight. Elvio stood up, came closer, and put a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, he knew, and he asked for my help," he said in a steady voice. "Now I'm going to protect you, just like Diego wanted." I looked up and met Elvio's eyes under the dim light. I saw a part of Diego in him, his strength, his loyalty, and his love for family. A lightning flash lit up the yard, outlining Elvio's face, and for a moment it was like seeing Diego again, as if he were still here, facing everything with me. I took Elvio's hand, squeezing it as if I were afraid it would disappear. "Elvio, I don't know what to do," I said in a trembling voice, "but I can't let Diego go like this. I have to find the truth." Elvio nodded without looking away from me. "I'll be here, Mom. We'll do it together." His words were like a small flame that warmed my frozen heart. I was no longer alone. Elvio, the adopted son I had loved as my own, was now my only support in this storm. That night, I barely slept. The rain beat down without ceasing, as if it were trying to wash away my pain, but it only kept me more awake. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes, as if tears had been running silently all night without my knowing. Sleep didn't come. Only images of Diego, his words in the video, and his scribbled letter haunted me. My body was exhausted, as if every step dragged a lifetime of suffering. I went out to the living room and saw that Elvio was already up early. A steaming cup of black coffee was waiting for me on the old wooden table. He looked at me with a mix of concern and firmness. "You need to be clear-headed, Mom," he said in a grave but confident voice. "We start today." I nodded, taking the cup. The steam warmed my hands, but my heart was still cold. A part of me was afraid that the truth would be even more painful than what I already knew. But another, stronger part pushed me to continue for Diego. I couldn't stop. We left the house. It was still drizzling. The drops fell on the small street. The street vendor on the corner shouted, offering us hot breakfast tacos. Elvio stopped. He bought 2 and gave me one. "Eat something, Mom. You have to save your strength," he said in a soft voice. I took the taco, but I didn't feel like eating. My stomach was churning, not from hunger, but from the doubts that were screaming inside me. I just smiled weakly. I put the taco in my sweater pocket, and we continued walking towards the bus stop. The noise of the cars, the smell of smoke and rain surrounded me, but I didn't pay attention. In my mind, there was only one goal: to discover the truth about Diego's death. We arrived at the Central Bank of Cleveland, an imposing building with a spacious, gleaming lobby. The marble floor shone under the lights. Employees in navy uniforms came and went in a hurry, but a young woman recognized me as soon as I entered. "Mrs. Alma," she said in a trembling voice with a look of pity. "I'm so sorry about Diego." I nodded, trying to contain the pain I felt in my chest. My son's name, mentioned by others, was still like a stab. Elvio intervened, getting straight to the point with a sharp voice. "We need to check his account records, especially recent withdrawals." The employee hesitated, looking around as if she was afraid someone would see her. And then she led us to a small office at the end of the hallway. Inside, she turned on the computer, and the screen lit up with Diego's transaction history. I stood behind her, my hands clinging to the back of the chair to stay on my feet. The figures appeared, cold and cruel. $50,000, then $100,000, withdrawn continuously, only a few weeks apart. They were such large amounts that they made me dizzy. Diego, my son, who saved every penny to buy me a new shawl. How could he have taken out so much money? The employee lowered her voice, whispering as if she was afraid of being heard. "Every time he came, he was accompanied by an older man. I think he was his father-in-law." I felt breathless. I felt the blood stop circulating. Mr. Ramiro. His name appeared in my mind, along with his cold look at the funeral. Elvio quickly took a photo of the screen with his phone. His expression hardened, containing his rage. The employee continued, giving us a photocopy of the life insurance contract. I took it with a trembling hand. The amount in the contract was enormous, more than I had ever imagined. But what made my heart stop was the line that indicated the beneficiary, Andrea Grayson. Only her. Not me, not his family. Only Andrea. I squeezed the paper, my nails digging into the palm of my hand, and said in a choked voice, "My son was pushed into this." Elvio put a hand on my shoulder, not saying anything, but his hand squeezed hard, as if he wanted to transmit his strength to me. Before we left, the employee slipped a bundle of other receipts into my hand. Her voice was almost a whisper. "The signature on these looks very different. I think he was forced to sign." I looked at the papers. The clumsy, trembling letters looked nothing like Diego's confident signature. Every stroke was like a cry for help that I hadn't heard. Leaving the bank, the sun was shining brightly, but I didn't feel any warmth. I leaned on Elvio's shoulder. I felt my legs trembling, as if they no longer had the strength to go on, the noise of the street, the people passing by. But in my head there was only one thought. I had to unmask them. Andrea, Mr. Ramiro, Mrs. Letizia, the ones who pushed Diego to his death, the ones who took advantage of my son's love and trust. In the afternoon, the air was still humid and heavy, like my mood. Elvio and I got off an old bus and stopped in front of the gate of the construction site where Diego supposedly fell from the scaffolding. The wide, rusty metal gate looked like an open mouth, ready to swallow my hopes. The roar of a cement mixer mixed with the shouts of the workers and the constant hammering. The smell of dust and cement stung my nose, making me cough. I stood there looking at the construction site and felt my heart tighten. This was where Diego went, where my son, with all his dreams and passion, fell forever. I looked up at the very tall scaffolding. The metal bars shone, newly installed. It looked as solid as a fortress. Not a crack, not a sign that it was loose. I remembered Diego telling me how he checked every detail of his constructions. Always careful, always meticulous. How could such a new scaffolding have collapsed? How could a person like Diego, with so many years of experience, have fallen in such an absurd way? I squeezed my rosary, my nails digging into the palm of my hand. "No, this isn't right," I whispered to myself. "This isn't right." Elvio walked beside me, his gaze sharp, containing his rage. He saw a young worker resting in a corner of the site, wiping sweat with a dirty rag. Elvio approached him and asked in a low but firm voice, "Were you here on the day of Engineer Diego's accident?" The worker looked up with a look of mistrust. He looked around as if he was afraid someone would hear him, and then he whispered, "Yes, I was here. The scaffolding had just been put up the day before. It was very solid. It couldn't have just fallen on its own." His words were like a hammer blow to my heart. I felt weak. I grabbed Elvio's arm, feeling my legs fail me. "So, why did Diego—" I said, my voice choked, unable to finish the sentence. The worker shook his head with a look of pity. "I don't know, ma'am, but things weren't normal that day." I felt as if a veil covering the truth was slowly lifting, but each new piece only caused me more pain. Elvio squeezed my hand as if to give me strength and guided me through the piles of bricks and dust. An old security guard with gray hair approached us, recognizing me. "You're Engineer Diego's mom, aren't you?" he asked in a grave and sad voice. "I'm so sorry. He was a good man." I nodded, tears about to well up. "Thank you," I said in a trembling voice. "Do you know anything about that day?" Elvio intervened, his voice sharper. "Did you see anything strange? Anything at all?" The guard sighed, looking around as if he was afraid of being watched. He lowered his voice, almost whispering. "That day it was lunchtime. All the workers had left. I saw the young Diego go in with an older man. I think he was his father-in-law. They entered the site, and a little later I heard the crash. I ran, but it was already too late." I felt like I was drowning. I squeezed Elvio's arm. Mr. Ramiro, him again, the man with the cold look at the funeral, the one who appeared on the bank receipts. Now he was at the construction site right before Diego died. I asked, trembling, "Is there any camera that recorded anything?" The guard nodded with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "There are no cameras inside the site, but there is one at the entrance. It recorded when they went in together." He led us to his small booth. He took out an old USB drive and gave it to Elvio. "This is a copy. I saved it because I knew this wasn't so simple." Elvio carefully put the USB in his pocket and thanked him. We watched the video right there on Elvio's phone. The image was blurry but clear. Diego, walking tiredly, entered the site with Mr. Ramiro. They said something to each other, and then they disappeared behind the gate. Elvio sighed. His voice was grave. "This proves that they went in together, but it's not enough to accuse him." I looked around the construction site. The roar of the machinery and the constant hammering hit my head. I felt an indescribable rage. Diego didn't fall. Diego wasn't careless. Someone pushed my son. They took his life away. I imagined Diego on the scaffolding alone with Mr. Ramiro, and then I covered my face. Tears fell in silence. "How could they do that to my son?" I whispered, my voice choked. Elvio hugged me by the shoulders without saying anything, but his hand squeezed firmly as if he wanted to tell me he felt the same pain. We left the construction site in silence, walking on the dusty ground. I felt like I was walking in a nightmare where every step brought me closer to a terrible truth, but I couldn't stop. I looked at the sky,
now clear, but it brought me no comfort. "Diego," I whispered, as if my son could hear me somewhere. "Mom is going to find the truth for you, I promise." It was late at night. My small house was dark. Only the sound of the rain falling in the yard broke the silence, as if it were telling a sad story without words. Elvio and I were sitting in the living room. The yellowish light of the old table lamp illuminated his face, tense and determined. We had just watched the video of the construction site again, the image of Diego entering with Mr. Ramiro, and every time I saw it, I felt my heart shrink. I clutched Diego's letter. His clumsy words resonated in my head. "They don't just want to kill me, they're coming for you too." I wanted to act, to scream, but I didn't know where to start. Elvio was sitting across from me in silence, but his gaze seemed to be secretly plotting a plan, like a soldier preparing for battle. Suddenly, some soft knocks on the door broke my thoughts. Knock, knock. The knocks were light, but in the silence, they sounded like thunder. I was startled. My heart was pounding. Who could it be at this hour, in this rain? Elvio stood up. He motioned for me to stay still. His gaze was alert. I clutched my rosary, standing behind him, filled with fear. "Who is it?" Elvio asked in a grave but firm voice. There was no answer. Only another weaker knock. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, and walked with Elvio to open the door. The door creaked open, and in front of us stood a young woman, soaked in a torn plastic raincoat. Her hair was plastered to her forehead. Her eyes were reddened, as if she had been crying. She was trembling, hugging herself to protect herself from the cold. "I'm Carmen, the Graysons' housekeeper," she introduced herself in a trembling, almost inaudible voice. I looked at her, surprised. A feeling of unease came over me. The Graysons. That name was now like a sharp knife in my heart. Elvio stepped forward, his voice harsh. "What do you need? Why are you coming at this hour?" Carmen looked up, her eyes full of fear, but also of determination. "I have something I need to show Mrs. Alma," she said, in a choked voice. She took an old phone with a broken screen from her pocket and turned it on with trembling hands. "I managed to record what they were saying," she whispered, as if she was afraid someone would hear her. Elvio and I looked at each other, and I motioned for her to come in. Carmen entered. Water from her clothes dripped onto the floor. I gave her a dry towel, but she barely took it. Her gaze was still fixed on the phone. She pressed a button, and a video began to play. A discussion was heard. The high-pitched, cruel voices chilled my blood in the video. Andrea's voice sounded shrill, full of anger. "Did you go too far, Dad? If you hadn't pushed him, we would have had time to force the old lady to sign." Mr. Ramiro responded with a growl, trying to justify himself. "He threatened to tell his mom everything. He didn't leave me any other choice." Then came Mrs. Letitia's voice, cold and sharp. "If Alma doesn't sign the insurance, the plan is ruined." I brought my hand to my chest and slumped into the armchair, feeling the world crumble at my feet. Tears streamed down my cheeks in silence. So it was true. A cruel and horrible truth. Diego didn't fall. Someone pushed Diego. My son was murdered by his own father-in-law, and all for money, for the endless greed of the Grayson family. Elvio clenched his teeth. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone. I looked at him and saw the fire of anger in his eyes. Carmen stood there, trembling, and said in a choked voice, "They always yelled at me, humiliated me. Today, they even insulted my parents. They called us starving." I couldn't take it anymore. I knew about young Diego, and I wanted to do the right thing. She paused, took a deep breath, and continued, "If necessary, I'll go to court to testify." I looked at Carmen, a small and fragile young woman, but in her eyes, I saw a bravery I had never seen in anyone from the Grayson family. I got up and took her hand firmly. Tears were still falling. "You saved me and you saved Diego," I said in a trembling voice. "Thank you, honey, for giving me the opportunity to seek justice for my son." Carmen bowed her head. Her tears also fell. I just wanted to do the right thing, ma'am, she whispered. Elvio put a hand on her shoulder. His voice grave but warm. You are very brave, Carmen. We won't let you face them alone. The next morning, Elvio and I took all the evidence to the police station. The letter from Diego, the video he left, the bank receipts with the forced signature, the video from the construction site camera, and now Carmen's video. Everything was like a set of sharp knives ready to expose the Grayson family's crime. I stood in front of the officer's desk, handing over each paper, each USB, with my hands trembling. This is all we have, I said in a choked voice. My son was killed. Please help us. The officer looked at me with compassion and nodded. We will investigate, Mrs. Alma, I promise you. In the afternoon, the news spread through the town like a hurricane. The police arrested Andrea, Mr. Ramiro, and Mrs. Letizia, just as they were on their way to my house with a new insurance folder, surely to continue pressuring me to sign. The neighbors gathered in front of my door, commenting in low voices. Finally the truth came out, said Mrs. Rosora, taking my hand with reddened eyes. You are very strong, Alma. Diego is smiling at you from heaven. I just nodded, unable to speak, feeling a mix of pain and relief. The trial was held in the Central Court of Cleveland. It seemed that the whole town had gathered there, filling the seats and hallways. The murmurs resonated like waves, but I was sitting in the front row, my hands trembling, clutching my rosary, not hearing anything but the beating of my heart. Beside me were Elvio, with a firm gaze, and Carmen, the brave young woman, silent, but with her head held high. I looked at them, feeling that I was holding on to the last two children I had left, the ones who had accompanied me through this storm. I whispered to myself, Diego, today I will do one last thing for you. But in my heart, I knew that nothing could fill the void my son had left. When the prosecutor stood up, the whole room fell silent. He played the video that Carmen had risked everything to record, and Andrea's voice resonated, shrill and cruel. Did you go too far, Dad? Every word that came from the speakers was like a knife in my heart. The public held its breath. Some covered their mouths in horror, others shook their heads. Mr. Ramiro, sitting in the defendant's box, turned red and tried to shout something, but his gaze was one of panic. Andrea kept her head down.
Her hair, once impeccable, was now messy, with no trace of her arrogance. Mrs. Letizia, who had always looked at me with contempt, was now motionless, with her hands clasped. I looked at those who had taken Diego from me and felt a wave of rage mixed with an indescribable pain. The prosecutor continued, his voice grave and confident, presenting each piece of evidence like a hammer blow. The letter Diego left in his desperate handwriting, the bank receipts with the forced signature, the video Diego sent to Elvio where my son tried to warn about the Graysons' plan. Each piece of evidence was a new wound that left me breathless. The defense attorney tried to interrupt, his voice hurried. This is not enough to incriminate my clients. But the judge, an older man with a stern gaze, hit the gavel. Silence. These are legal proofs. The sound of the gavel resonated decisively, marking a turning point. Then it was Carmen's turn. She stood up, her hands trembling, but her voice was clear and strong, resonating in the room. I saw them, and I heard them myself. They admitted to pushing the young Diego, to having planned everything to collect the insurance. I testify. The room stirred again, and I saw Carmen's eyes, scared but full of determination. Mr. Ramiro hit the table, red with anger, shouting, "That brat is lying! She's just a maid!" But the judge interrupted him with a firm voice. Precisely because she was in your house, her testimony is even more credible. I looked at Carmen, feeling immense gratitude. That young woman, with her bravery, was helping me get justice for Diego. Finally, the judge stood up. His voice resonated in the silent courtroom. Andrea Grayson, Ramiro Grayson, and Letizia Grayson are declared guilty of homicide, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit robbery. The sentence was severe and implacable. I sat there, stunned. Tears ran down my cheeks, a mix of pain and relief. Justice for Diego had finally arrived, but why did my heart still feel so heavy? I looked at Elvio. I saw him squeezing Carmen's hand. His eyes were reddened, but his lips were tight, holding back emotion. I put my hand on his shoulder and whispered, "We did it, son." But inside, I knew that nothing would bring Diego back. After the trial, a crowd surrounded me as I left the courthouse. My neighbors, familiar faces from the town, came to take my hand. "Mrs. Alma, you are so brave," said Mrs. Rosora with teary eyes. "Diego from heaven is smiling at you." I nodded, trying to force a smile, but the tears kept falling. "Thank you, sister," I whispered in a choked voice. An older man who had worked with Diego took my hand and said, "He was a good kid. Mrs. Alma, you did the right thing." I just nodded, unable to say more. I felt relief because the truth had come to light, but also an immense pain for the high price we had paid. A few months later, I decided to go abroad with Elvio. It wasn't an easy decision. The little house where Diego and I lived happy days, where Elvio ran and played with his brother, contained a whole lifetime of memories. But I knew that if I stayed, I would be trapped forever in the pain. On the day of departure, I stood in front of the door with the old key in my hand. I looked at the house one last time, its cracked walls, its shingle roof with moss. And suddenly, I saw the image of Diego smiling, radiant, running to greet me as he did when he was a boy. I left a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the windowsill and whispered, "Goodbye, son. I will carry you with me in my heart." Then I locked the door and walked away without looking back. On the plane, Elvio took my hand firmly. His gaze was warm, but it still held a trace of sadness. "From now on, I will be your support, Mom," he said in a confident voice. I nodded. The tears fell in silence. I looked out the window. The sun was reflecting on the white, fluffy clouds. A strange feeling came over me, a mix of loss and hope. I thought of Diego, of the years we spent together, of Elvio, the adopted son who became my true family. "Blood doesn't always make you family," I whispered in a choked voice. "True family is the one that stays by your side when everything falls apart." Elvio squeezed my hand without saying anything, but I knew he understood. The plane took off, carrying us towards a new beginning. I looked at the clouds, imagining that Diego was somewhere, smiling at me. My story, Diego's, Elvio's, ended with a pain that would never disappear, but it also opened a new door where love and hope still existed. I closed my eyes. I let the tears fall and whispered, "Thank you, Diego. I will continue to live for you." The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We don't tell this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I really wonder if you were in my place. What would you do? Would you choose to be silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to regain your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. God always blesses. And I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I leave you with two of the channel's most loved stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.